My next guest comes from one of America's most celebrated political families, but has not been a politician himself, but he is aiming to change all of that. Back in April, he announced his bid to challenge Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination for president. However, there's a lot of discussion today and speculation that this coming Monday, he may announce an independent third-party bid for president after criticizing the process that Democrats have put forth many times. Joining me now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Mr. Kennedy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now I'll get to that planned Monday event later, but first I want to focus on the things that seem to be most pressing for the American people. The ones you want to serve as president, of course. Let's start with the one thing that seems to impact everybody. That, of course, is the economy and what the team in the White House currently calls Bidenomics. Inflation is up, purchasing power is down, and yet Joe Biden continues to tell all of us how great everything is. You've been on the road. You've been talking to people. What do you think?
I think, when I say that to people, they feel like they're being gaslighted. There's a level of desperation and disintegration in this country, not only economic, but mental health, physical health, that I've never seen before. You have people, 57% of the people in this country cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency in their family. For people like that, if the gas light comes on in their car, it's like the apocalypse because they know they can't pay the mechanic. They're going to lose their car. They're going to lose their job, and then they're going to lose their home. And they're going to join this growing army of the homeless in our country. The average income in America today is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs. So, people, if you just get by with what you basic needed to survive, you end up $5,000 in debt at the end of the year. People are putting that debt on their credit cards. We just hit a milestone of $1 trillion in credit card debt, a private credit card debt in this country. Nothing like this ever happened. They're paying 22% interest. If the mafia charged you that, it would be called loan sharking. They could go to jail. But a Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, it's business as usual. And the middle class in this country is being strip mined of its wealth and equity, which is all going upward and ending up in the pockets of giant corporations like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, who now control 88% of the S&P 500. They're now buying our single-family homes. They're putting, our kids are never going to be able to afford a home, and we need.
Those are all things we talk about here on this program, by the way, because we're pricing the American dream away from everybody. Like you said, if somebody had a couple of flat tires today, they couldn't afford to pay for that. 17.4%, the cumulative inflation since Joe Biden took office. We print money. We spend a tremendous amount of money. We bring in $5 trillion a year, but spend $7 trillion. How do we change that? Because it's insanity defined, isn't it?
Yeah, there's ways to change it. Number one, we need to wind down the war machine. We can't keep 800 bases abroad. One of the biggest expenses we have, we spend $1.3 trillion total on national security and the military. We were going to cut after 92. We were supposed to get a peace dividend when the walls came down in the Soviet Union, and the proposal then was to cut the military to $200 billion a year. Instead, we've gone up to $1.3 trillion total. It's about $999 billion just for weapons and military. But if you include the national security costs and veterans costs, it's $1.3 trillion. So we can cut that back. We can cut the military costs almost in half, down to about $500 billion. We need to cut chronic disease in our country. That's the biggest expense.
Hold on one second there. I wanted to talk about the military just for 1 second. You can cut it back without reducing effectiveness. That's the point you're making. It's not going to affect our ability to defend ourselves and our nation and our shores, correct?
There's so much waste in our military, and we can arm ourselves to the teeth at home around our borders, make ourselves too expensive to ever invade, continue to dominate the sea lanes and keep them open, and to protect neutral areas like Antarctica, and retain a capacity to strike if we need to in emergency at half the cost. And We now spend more than the next 10 nations combined on our military. We don't need to do that. And we're bankrupting our country. The real strength of a nation is in economic power. And we should be doing what the Chinese are doing so much better than us, which is to be projecting economic power abroad rather than military power. Projecting military, we spent $8 trillion on wars in the last 20 years, and they
You
have
sure
not made
have. And I happen to agree with you. We don't need a military base. With technology today, we don't need a military base, in all the places we have them right now. But America goes in, builds a military base. We never leave. We're there forever, on infinitum, and we spend all of this money, and it benefits some congressional district somewhere, so the money continues to flow at the expense of the American taxpayer. And I want to shift gears a little bit to something else I know you've talked about for a number of years, and that's climate change. I know you're concerned about climate change. It's something that you think is important, but I've also heard you say recently it's not worth destroying the country over, because here we are watching this forced move to EVs, attacks on water heaters, refrigerators, ceiling fans, generators. It's an attack on the American middle class again. It comes under the guise of we're going to save the planet. But if you save the planet but destroy America, what did you accomplish?
Yeah, well, I think we could save the planet and we can avert, the most catastrophic um, uh, outcomes of climate change by using free markets and not top-down controls. And the problem is that every crisis now, this way we saw in COVID, is used by elites and by large, corporate interests to clamp down and by government agencies to clamp down totalitarian controls and then to shift wealth upward. And we need to get away from that, and we need to do things that are consistent with American values. I've said the same thing for 40 years. I've been on the spear tip of the climate debate, and I don't care if you believe in climate or not. I have lots of people who support me who do not believe in human-caused climate change, but they agree with me on environmental issues. We shouldn't be cutting down the Appalachian Mountains. We shouldn't be poisoning every fish in our country with mercury from coal-burning power plants. We shouldn't be acidifying 20% of the lakes in the Adirondacks and destroying the forest cover on the high peaks of the Appalachians with acid rain. Oh, we need to phase out carbon anyway, but you do it using market force by ending the subsidies. Carbon now gets $5.2 trillion in subsidies a year. We end those, we have real market, and people buy the cheapest energy, which ultimately will
They certainly do. America thrives on vast quantities of cheap energy, always has. We need that, and that's a fact. At the same time, the Chinese are building a new coal-fired power plant every week or two, many of which they're not using. They're putting in mothballs for future reference while we go to potentially unsustainable models, and you know that. So I agree with you on the fact we can't destroy America in pursuit of the climate Green New Deal, but we need to figure out how to do both, don't we?
Well, I think it's very, it's easy to do both. All we need to do is end energy subsidies. The green energy gets some subsidies, but carbon gets many more, and nuke gets the most. We need to end those subsidies. We end those subsidies, and then we build out our energy grid in this country so that you can actually have a marketplace. And when you get a marketplace, you get efficiencies. And the cost of electrons,
right,
will go down the same way that the cost of bits and bytes did when we built the ARPANET grid for computers, the same way that that phone calls went down when we built
when you get to a point, but it's got to be market driven. I agree with you on that. When you have people in the United Auto Workers Union, they can't afford the vehicles they're building when they're EVs. They can't even come close because of all of these, even with the subsidies. The price of these vehicles is so high, people don't want them. They have concerns about range and everything else. I want to get to a couple more things. I know you're busy and I know you're tight on time, so I just want to ask you about a couple of other things, like the border. The border, the Biden administration keeps telling us is secure. Now they've decided to build the wall that they said they never would. They would never build 1 foot of wall, they said. Nancy Pelosi said she would keep the government closed forever before she'd build any more wall with on the Texas-Mexico border. What do you make of that?
I think that was a huge error. I've been down to the border. I watched 300 people from Africa and Asia come across in 2 hours. I interviewed them. It's a humanitarian disaster. It's not good for them. They're now in this country. They come across that border. What I saw is really extraordinary. They come across, they're fingerprinted. If they have no political criminal record, they're brought to the Yuma airport, and they're given a plane ticket to any destination they want in the United States, which we, the taxpayer, American taxpayer, pays for if they don't have the money themselves, which most of them don't because they've been robbed by the cartels, which control the border now. Oh, we brought 7 million people across, allowed 7 million people to cross in the last 3 years. The legal immigration at that time was 3.1 million. We're now getting 10,000 a day. They are destroying the social service
Destroying the country. Yeah, they're destroying they can't afford it. Yuma Hospital that you mentioned there, losing millions of dollars a month because it's filled with people from outside of this country. The locals can't even use the hospital. It's an absolute disaster. Do you support building the wall?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to build a wall all the way 2,200 miles from San Diego to Brownsville, Texas, but you need it in the populated areas. There's 5 huge gaps in that wall where these immigrants are coming through, and we need to seal those immediately. It is a national crisis. And we also, one of the things we can do to end this is we can make passport cards available to every American for free. And you need those then to get a job, and that will shut down the border overnight too. And it will also make
you can shut down the border, obviously, with the National Guard or sheriff's departments or police. Shutting down and securing the border is a pretty straightforward operation. It would seem that the administration currently didn't want to do it. They changed their mind. But 2 more quick things for you here. You consider yourself a constitutional absolutist, which I appreciate, by the way, when it comes to free speech in this country. It's under assault every single day. We're now hearing more and more whistleblowers saying that this government worked with social media companies and others to silence people, you included, by the way. And I find it abhorrent to what the United States is supposed to be. Freedom of speech, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, is the envy of the rest of the world. And our government is apparently acting out and silencing people like yourself or me or whomever that they think is spreading the wrong message. I mean, how do you address that?
Well, I would address it by issuing an executive order the day that I get into office, forbidding any federal employee from discussing or talking or colluding with any social media site or media site to censor political speech in this country. It's just wrong. Everybody knows that. There's never been a time in history when we look back and the people who are censoring speech were the bad guys. Were the good guys. They're always the bad guys. It's always the first step toward totalitarian control. And we've been warned about that by Orwell, by Aldous Huxley.
Sure, well, let me ask you. Are the Democrats the bad guys? This is the party that you've been a member of for years and years. You seem to be going away from that. The Democrats seem to be the ones engineering this censorship, silencing people, canceling people. Are the Democrats the enemy in your mind now?
Well, the same thing was happening during the Trump administration, but the level of collusion and the energy put into it by the Biden administration was much, much larger. And Judge Doty's decision, and my lawsuit, Kennedy versus Biden and Missouri versus Biden, which now have been consolidated, have yielded all these discovery documents that show that 37 hours after he took office, after taking the oath of office to uphold the Constitution, President Biden's White House was ordering Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to remove my accounts. And all of those sites were saying, well, what he's saying is actually true. It's not misinformation. It's accurate. And
malinformation. That's the new word they use now, right? Malinformation. It's information they just don't like, right?
They had to coin a new word, which is malinformation, which means information that is accurate, but nonetheless, unpleasant for the government. So, and
isn't that what the First Amendment's for? It's not for happy speech. It's for unpleasant things. It irritates people. It frightens people. It angers people. That's the point. That's why it's the envy of the rest of the world. We couldn't have this conversation